Welcome to The Explainer. We often think about the First World War in terms of battlefields and borders. But what if I told you it also sparked a revolution right inside people's homes? Today, we're digging into that story, a story of crisis, big promises, and how the war completely changed the meaning of home in Britain.
All right, let's just jump right in. This quote, it sounds like something out of a Dickens novel, right? The coffin close. But it's not. This is from an official government report in 1917 describing real housing in Glasgow. It gives you a sense of just how grim things were for millions of people. And this was the reality before the war pushed everything right over the edge.
So let's be clear. Before the war even started, housing was already a massive problem. But the war, well, it was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. It took a really bad situation and turned it into an absolute national emergency.
So what did that bad situation actually look like? Well, picture this. Britain's big industrial cities were just crammed with homes that you and I wouldn't even consider livable. We're talking serious overcrowding, no basic things like flushing toilets. And get this, back-to-back houses. That means they shared a rear wall, so there was literally no way to get a breeze through. Just imagine, it was the perfect recipe for disease to spread.
And then, boom, the war hits, and it's like a pressure cooker just building and building. First, all house building, even simple repairs, just stops. Everything, every brick, every worker is needed for the war. At the same time, people are flooding into the cities for factory jobs, so demand for housing goes through the roof, and so do the rents. And then, the war ends, and millions of soldiers start coming home looking for a place to live. You can see the crisis brewing, can't you?
So what was the result of all that pressure? Well, it comes down to this one staggering number, 400,000. That's how many homes in Britain were officially deemed unfit for a human being to live in after the war. Think about that. It's not just a statistic. It was a massive crisis, hitting public health and the whole country's spirit.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, the problem was actually way bigger. On top of the 400,000 uninhabitable homes, the country was short another 800,000. That's the gap, the number of families who simply had nowhere to go. We're talking about a country teetering on the edge of a social disaster.
Okay, so you've got this massive problem, you've got millions of soldiers returning from the horrors of the trenches. The government had to do something, right? And they didn't just release some boring policy document. Nope, they came out with one of the most powerful, most famous political slogans in British history.
Homes fit for heroes. Just think about that phrase. It was brilliant. It came from the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, during his 1918 election campaign. It was a direct promise to every soldier coming back. You fought for Britain, and you won't be coming back to those filthy slums. You'll be coming back to a better country, a country with a decent home for you and your family.
And this wasn't just talk. That slogan became law. It was called the Addison Act, named for the guy pushing it, Christopher Addison. And you can't overstate how big a deal this was. It was revolutionary. For the first time ever, the government was saying, you know what? Making sure people have a decent place to live, that's our job.
So, how is it supposed to work? Well, on paper, it was pretty simple. The main government in London would provide the cash. The local councils out in the cities and towns would do the heavy lifting, clear out the slums, and build brand new houses. And because these were for working families, the rents would be low, and the central government would just pick up the tab for any losses. Sounds good, right?
So you have this huge, ambitious plan. The intentions are great, but the big question is, did it actually work? Well, yes and no. On the one hand, they actually did build houses. A lot of them, in fact. We're talking about 170,000 new council houses in just a few years. For the time, a government building project on that scale was completely unheard of. It was a huge achievement. And for the people who got those houses, oh man, it was life-altering. This quote really says it all. They jumped for joy. Can you imagine going from a damp, dark slum to a brand new house with space and proper facilities? It was literally like winning the lottery.
But here's the catch. 170,000 sounds like a lot, right? But remember that other number? The 800,000 shortage? Suddenly, 170,000 feels like a drop in the ocean. For all the people still stuck in the slums, that big promise of homes fit for heroes started to sound pretty hollow. In fact, people started making a dark joke out of it.
So why didn't they build more? Well, the whole thing just ran into a wall of real-world problems. For starters, a lot of local councils just weren't that into the idea. Plus, the war had left a massive shortage of everything. Bricklayers, wood, you name it.
And of course, the private building companies, they could make a lot more money building offices than they could building console houses, so that's what they did.
But you know what? All of those were small problems compared to the big one. There was a fatal flaw, a financial time bomb ticking away at the very heart of the plan, and it was about to explode into a massive public scandal.
Okay, so here's the fatal flaw. Addison was in charge of spending the money, right? The government was paying. But he had zero control over the prices. The private builders knew the government was desperate. They had to build these houses. So, what did they do? They charged whatever they felt like. And the costs just went, well, they went insane. And this right here, this shows you just how bad it got. Look at those numbers. The government was paying £910 for a house that only cost £385 to build. That's more than double. The government wasn't just subsidizing housing for heroes. It was handing over a fortune to private building companies. Well, as you can imagine, when the public found out about this, they were furious. On top of that, the country was sliding into a nasty recession. So the government did what governments do when they panic. They set up a committee. It was led by a guy named Sir Eric Geddes, and his job was simple: cut spending. Cut it everywhere. They didn't call it a scalpel, they called it the Geddes Axe.
And that axe came down hard. As you can see, they cut military spending, they cut education, but look what happened to housing. The subsidies weren't just trimmed back a little, they were eliminated, gone. Just like that, the whole Homes for Heroes dream was over.
So that's it, right? The program was a total disaster, a spectacular failure. Well, not quite. Because the funny thing is, even in its failure, it left something really important behind, something that changed Britain forever.
I mean, let's be honest. If you were looking at it in 1921, it looked terrible. The guy behind it, Addison, had to resign. The money had vanished, and the housing crisis was still raging. By every measure, it seemed like a complete and total failure.
But here's the twist. Even though the policy failed, the idea behind it survived. The Addison Act, with all its problems, had planted a brand new seed in British politics. The idea that a safe home wasn't a luxury, but a basic public service. That it was the government's job to step in. The genie was out of the bottle. They couldn't just go back to the way things were.
So that's the real question we're left with, isn't it? Was this whole Homes for Heroes thing a massive, costly failure, or was it actually a success in disguise? Was all that chaos and scandal just the messy, painful birth of something crucial, the very idea of social housing that would go on to shape Britain for the next 100 years? What do you think?